Some battles define a lifetime, but a few define the destiny of an entire nation. In the winter of 1788, the mighty Qing Empire of China sent an army of nearly 200,000 men south, determined to crush the small and divided Dai Viet Kingdom, ancient Vietnam. To Beijing, this was supposed to be quick and decisive, just another empire stamping its will on a weaker neighbor. But what happened next would stun the world, because standing in their way was a man unlike any other, Ngoc Hoi, better known as Emperor Quang Trung, a general with a mind sharper than any blade and a heart that burned with the fire of his people. At this moment, the Qing army occupied the Thang Long Citadel, today's Hanoi. Confident and unprepared, they celebrated their victory too soon. Meanwhile, far to the south in Pushuan, today's Hue, Quang Trung gathered his troops. As the Lunar New Year approached, he didn't promise them gold or glory. Instead, he gave them something far more powerful: urgency, determination, and certainty of victory. He declared, "Before the first firecrackers of the new year fade, we will drive the Qing from our land." It was an impossible vow. His army was smaller, his resources thinner, and the Qing forces, entrenched in the capital, were certain of triumph. Yet from the mountains and forests, war drums thundered. From villages and rice fields, men rose with spears, swords, and the will to fight. Women and elders carried supplies, messages, and courage. The nation moved as one. And at its heart stood Emperor Quang Trung, preparing to march with lightning speed, to strike before the enemy could even understand what was happening. The stage was set. The fire was lit. The Battle of Spring, 1789, was about to begin. On the final days of December 1788, as the northern winds cut through the land, Emperor Quang Trung gave the order. From Pushuan, he began one of the fastest, most daring military marches in history. His army, roughly 100,000 strong, moved with extraordinary speed. Soldiers carried not only weapons, but also their unshakable will. Each man knew this was no ordinary campaign. It was a fight for the very survival of their homeland. The march stretched more than 600 kilometers from the central lands to the capital in the north. Roads were rough, rivers flooded, the winter air sharp and merciless. And yet, the army moved as if driven by thunder itself. At every village, drums beat. People poured into the streets to greet the soldiers. Women handed them rice balls wrapped in leaves. Elders gave words of blessing. Children ran alongside, shouting, "Drive the Qing away!" But there was no chaos. The march was disciplined, precise. Quang Trung had drilled his men to fight as one body. He divided them into units, rotated rest times, and used local guides to move quickly through forests and rivers. At night, the soldiers lit no fires, revealing no position. At dawn, they were already on the move. The Qing scouts, if they saw anything at all, reported only shadows, an army moving too fast to track. By early January, after only 6 days, the great host of Quang Trung stood on the doorstep of the Red River Delta. The Qing generals in Thang Long Citadel still believed they had weeks before the enemy could arrive. They were wrong, because the storm was already at their gates. By the time the Qing commanders in Thang Long realized an army was coming, it was already too late. At midnight on the 7th day of the Lunar New Year, Quang Trung's forces struck their first target, Ha Hoi, a garrison guarding the approaches to the capital. The night was thick with mist, the fields soaked with dew. The Qing soldiers, confident that no enemy could possibly have reached them so soon, were asleep in their barracks. Suddenly, drums thundered, horns blared. From the darkness, fire arrows streaked into the sky, raining down on the wooden stockades. Vietnamese soldiers stormed forward, smashing gates, cutting down guards before they could even shout. Panic spread like wildfire. Many Qing troops, stunned and half awake, threw down their weapons and surrendered immediately. Others tried to flee into the night, but were cut down by cavalry waiting outside. Within an hour, the fortress had fallen. The path to the capital was opening, But Quang was not finished. He marched his army directly toward Ngoc Hoi, where one of the largest Qing contingents had fortified their camp. The Qing generals believed they could hold. They built barricades of sharpened stakes, piled sandbags, and waited with their cannons and muskets ready. On paper, it was an impregnable position, but Quang had prepared a weapon of his own. He ordered his men to build massive wooden shields, thick planks covered with soaked straw and mud, carried by teams of soldiers. These moving walls could absorb bullets and cannon fire. At dawn, the assault began. War drums roared across the foggy fields. The Vietnamese advanced in waves, the great shields before them. Musket volleys cracked, cannons thundered, but the shields held. Step by step, the lines moved closer. Then at Quang's signal, his troops hurled fire pots and grenades over the barricades. Explosions tore through the Qing defenses. In the chaos, ladders slammed against the walls and soldiers surged over with cries of, "Kill the invaders!" The Qing troops, once confident, broke. Some tried to resist but were overwhelmed. Others fled in blind panic, trampling one another in the mud. Entire regiments collapsed within hours. When the smoke cleared, Ngoc Hoi was a graveyard of broken weapons, shattered barricades, and fallen banners of the Qing Empire. The once invincible invaders had been dealt their first crushing defeat. But Quang was not celebrating. He knew this was only the beginning. Ahead still lay the heart of the Qing command, and the decisive strike that would end the war. By the morning of the 5th day of the Lunar New Year, the capital of Thang Long, what is now Hanoi, stood shrouded in fog. Firecrackers from the celebrations of the Qing officers had only just burned out. To them, the war was already won, but beyond the city walls, the thunder was coming. From the south, Emperor Quang's army poured into the outskirts of Thang Long. Veterans of Ngoc Hoi carried the smoke of victory on their armor, their spirits blazing. Fresh units surged forward, ready to crush the heart of the invaders. The Qing command, led by General Sun Shuyi, still believed their numbers would hold. They had garrisons stationed in and around the capital, with thousands of troops encamped at Dongda Hill. On paper, it looked like strength. In truth, it was a trap they had set for themselves. At dawn, Quang gave the signal. War drums rolled like thunder across the valley. His cavalry swept forward, hooves pounding the frozen ground. Infantry surged behind with shields, spears, and fire weapons ready. The attack hit the Qing camps like a hammer. Vietnamese troops stormed the outer defenses, toppling barricades and tearing through tents. Cannon fire shook the earth, but the disciplined formations of Quang's army closed in relentlessly. At Dongda, the fiercest battle raged. The Qing forces tried desperately to form ranks, but the speed and fury of the assault broke them apart. Vietnamese soldiers advanced with terrifying precision, their shouts echoing over the hills. "Strike them down!" Bodies clashed in hand-to-hand combat, spears against sabers, shields against musket fire. The field turned into chaos, mud, blood, and smoke swirling under the gray winter sky. Then in the middle of the battle, Quang himself rode to the front. His presence ignited his men. With a raised sword, he charged, cutting directly into the Qing lines. His cavalry followed, smashing the enemy's flank wide open. Panic consumed the Qing. Regiments collapsed, banners fell. Soldiers threw down their weapons and fled toward the city. But the streets of Thang Long were already choked with chaos. Vietnamese forces pushed in from every side, overwhelming the invaders block by block. By nightfall, Dongda Hill was a mountain of broken spears and abandoned armor. The Qing army had been annihilated. Thousands lay dead or captured. General Sun Shi himself barely escaped, fleeing in disguise, abandoning his men to their fate. The once proud army of the Qing Empire had been shattered in a single devastating blow. The capital of Thang Long was free again. The people poured into the streets, lighting fires, cheering and weeping with joy. For the first time in months, the city was theirs. But in the quiet after the storm, one truth remained clear. This victory was not just about driving out an invader. It was about proving that a nation once thought small and divided could rise together and defeat an empire. The smoke of battle drifted away, but the scars of war still lay heavy across the fields of Dongda. Thousands of Qing soldiers lay scattered, their banners broken, their weapons abandoned. The once mighty army had collapsed into a shattered remnant. Those who survived fled in terror. Many drowned in the Red River, throwing away their armor in desperate attempts to escape. Others wandered aimlessly into the countryside, where villagers, emboldened by victory, rose up against them. The people of Thang Long poured into the streets, weeping with joy, embracing the soldiers as heroes. Families reunited, temples lit incense in gratitude. For the first time in generations, the city had witnessed a triumph so swift, so complete, that it seemed touched by legend. But for Emperor Quang Trung, there was no time for simple celebration. He understood the scale of what had just happened. He had crushed a massive Qing invasion force, yes, but the Qing Empire still stood vast and powerful beyond the northern border. If he pursued revenge too far, another wave might come. If he showed weakness, the victory might be dismissed as luck. He had to strike a balance between power and diplomacy. Quang Trung ordered the burial of the dead, both Vietnamese and Qing alike. It was a gesture of humanity, but also a message. This was a just war, not slaughter. The Qing envoys who remained in the capital were treated with stern formality, not humiliation. Then he sent letters northward to Beijing. In them, he acknowledged the Qing emperor as a symbolic overlord, as had been the custom for centuries. But in practice, he declared independence. His tone was clear. Dai Viet had defended itself and would remain free. For the Qing court, reeling from humiliation, this was an exit they could accept. To admit outright defeat would shatter their prestige. To send another invasion so soon after such a disaster risked even greater loss. And so, they chose the only path left: peace. In the span of weeks, Quang Trung had not only saved his kingdom, he had secured it. With fire and steel, he had proven the strength of his nation. With diplomacy, he ensured that strength would endure. And so, Dai Viet stood victorious, not only on the battlefield, but on the stage of history. The year was 1789. In just a matter of weeks, Emperor Quang Trung had turned the tide of history. He had crushed a mighty empire's invasion, reclaimed his capital, and secured his nation's independence. Few battles in the world had ever been so swift, so decisive, so complete. But Quang Trung's legacy was greater than the battlefield. He proved that victory did not belong only to numbers, to wealth, or to vast empires. It belonged to discipline, strategy, courage, and above all, unity. The people of Dai Viet had risen as one, and together they had achieved the impossible. Farmers, scholars, soldiers, children, every hand and every heart had played a role. And in their unity, they discovered a truth that would echo through centuries, that a nation's spirit cannot be conquered. In the months that followed, peace returned. Markets reopened, festivals resumed, temples rang with prayers of thanks. For a time, the land breathed freely again. Yet history is never still. Quang Trung's reign would be cut short, his great plans for reform left unfinished. He dreamed of schools for every child, of stronger defenses, of a kingdom that could stand equal with the greatest powers of Asia. But fate was cruel. He would not live to see it all realized. And so his story remains both triumph and tragedy. Triumph in the brilliance of his victories, tragedy in the brevity of his years. Still, his spirit endures. Today, when the name Quang Trung is spoken, it carries more than memory. It carries defiance, resilience, and the reminder that even the smallest nation can rise against overwhelming odds. The Battle of 1789 was not just the story of one man or one army. It was the story of a people who refused to bow. And perhaps it is also a question for us. When the storms of life come, when empires of doubt and fear march against us, will we too rise? The drums of Quang Trung still echo, the fire still burns, and the story is not yet finished.